Rome did not fall because of one war. It did not fall because of one emperor. And it did not fall because of one moment where everything suddenly went wrong. Rome collapsed the way massive systems usually collapse, slowly at first, then all at once. And the strange part is that the beginning of the end does not look like a collapse at all. It looks like success. Because at the exact moment Rome is expanding across the known world, three men begin rising inside it who are so powerful, so different, and so ambitious that they slowly stop competing against Rome's enemies and start competing for Rome itself. Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, Marcus Crassus. Three men, three completely different kinds of power. And for a brief moment in history, they all decide the same thing: that Rome can be controlled. Not governed, not balanced, controlled. And once that belief exists inside a republic like Rome, everything that follows starts becoming unavoidable. Before these three men ever appear in the same political alliance, Rome is already starting to behave differently from what it was originally designed to be. On the surface, nothing looks unstable. Rome is winning wars constantly. Territories are expanding across the Mediterranean. Trade is exploding. Gold is flowing into the city from conquered regions across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Roman legions are becoming the most feared military force in the world. If you were living in Rome during this period, it would probably feel like your civilization was unstoppable. But underneath all of that success, something dangerous is happening. Because Rome is no longer just a republic built on laws and institutions. It is becoming an economy powered by conquest. Every war creates wealth. Every conquest creates political influence. Every military victory creates celebrities. And that changes the system. Roman generals no longer return home as simple military officers. They return home as national heroes. They bring back treasure, land, slaves, resources, and public support. Entire populations begin attaching themselves emotionally to successful commanders instead of the republic itself. And once people start becoming loyal to individuals more than institutions, republics begin getting unstable very quickly. The Senate still exists, technically, but it is slowly turning into something different. Less of a governing body, more of a battlefield. A place where elite families compete for influence, constantly through allies, favors, manipulation, and political sabotage. Laws still matter, but reputation matters more. Connections matter more. Money matters more. And military success matters most of all. And in that environment, three men rise who represent three completely different forms of power. And the problem is, none of these forms of power are designed to coexist peacefully forever. At the beginning of this story, Julius Caesar is not the most powerful man in Rome. Not even close. He's not the richest, he's not the most feared, and he is definitely not the most politically secure. In fact, early in his career, Caesar is constantly balancing on the edge of disaster financially and politically. But Caesar understands some things most Roman politicians do not. He understands momentum. Most senators think in terms of rules and tradition. Caesar thinks in terms of escalation. Not just gaining influence, but increasing it continuously before opponents have time to recover. And that makes him dangerous. He spends massive amounts of money building public support. Not normal campaign spending either. Huge amounts. He hosts games, public events, entertainment, ceremonies. He borrows enormous sums from wealthy Roman financiers just to maintain visibility. And this is risky because if Caesar ever loses politically, those debts could destroy him completely. But Caesar is gambling on something very specific. That popularity can eventually become protection. And he's right. Because Roman politics is starting to change. Public opinion matters more than it used to. Crowd opinions matter more than they used to. Visibility matters more than it used to. And Caesar understands how to turn attention into influence better than almost anyone alive. He also has another advantage that people underestimate constantly. He is unbelievably good at making people feel important around him. Soldiers feel valued around Caesar. Political allies feel useful around Caesar. The public feels seen around Caesar. Even when he is manipulating people, he rarely feels cold or distant. He feels charismatic. And charisma inside an unstable political system is an incredibly dangerous weapon. But Caesar still has a major problem. He does not yet have enough power to fully protect himself from Rome's political system. One failed election, one failed alliance, one major accusation from rivals, and his entire career could collapse. So Caesar needs something more permanent, something stronger than popularity. He needs allies. Pompey enters the story from the complete opposite direction. Where Caesar is rising, Pompey is already established. Pompey is famous long before the Triumvirate ever forms. This is a man who has spent years building one of the greatest military reputations in Rome. He wins campaigns in Spain, in North Africa, across the eastern Mediterranean. At one point, piracy in the Mediterranean becomes such a serious problem that Rome's grain supply is threatened. And grain matters because Rome is enormous by this point. Hundreds of thousands of people depend on imported food constantly. If grain shipments stop arriving, unrest starts immediately. Pompey is given extraordinary authority to solve the crisis, and he does it with shocking speed. He clears pirate strongholds across the Mediterranean so effectively that his reputation skyrockets even further. Rome starts calling him Pompey Magnus, Pompey the Great. And unlike many political nicknames throughout history, people genuinely mean it. When Pompey walks through Rome, people recognize him instantly. He has wealth, military prestige, political influence, veteran soldiers loyal to him. But ironically, all of that success creates a new problem. Rome begins fearing him, because the Roman Republic has a very deep fear built into its political culture. Powerful generals. Men whose armies become loyal to individuals instead of the state. And once that happens, republics become vulnerable to military politics very quickly. So even though Pompey is not openly trying to overthrow Rome, the Senate becomes nervous anyway. Because the fear is not necessarily who Pompey currently is, the fear is who he could become. And that creates a strange situation. Pompey is too respected to remove, too famous to ignore, and too powerful to fully trust. Which means he exists in a constant state of political tension, and eventually that tension pushes him towards Caesar. Then there's Crassus. And honestly, Crassus might be the most fascinating of the three because his power works completely differently. Caesar builds popularity. Pompey builds military glory. Crassus builds wealth. Enormous wealth. The kind of wealth that quietly influences everything around it. Crassus becomes one of the richest men in Roman history through property, investments, business networks, mining operations, and political financing. But what makes him interesting is the way he thinks. To Crassus, crisis is opportunity. There are stories about him maintaining private firefighting crews in Rome, and when buildings catch fire, his crews arrive quickly. But they do not immediately extinguish the flames. First, Crassus negotiates. If the owner is desperate enough, Crassus buys the burning property for an incredibly low price. Then the fire gets handled, which sounds almost cartoonishly ruthless, but it also perfectly explains how Rome is changing. Everything is becoming transactional, even disasters. Crassus understands markets better than almost anyone around him. But despite all of his wealth, there is one thing he cannot buy easily: respect equal to Pompey and Caesar. Because in Rome, money alone is not enough. Military glory matters more, and Crassus knows it. That insecurity slowly eats at him, because no matter how rich he becomes, people still talk about Pompey's victories. They still celebrate military heroes more than financiers. And eventually, Crassus decides he wants something that money cannot directly purchase. A legendary military victory, a campaign, a war. And that decision eventually destroys him. At first, these three men are not allies. They are rivals operating inside the same unstable political system. But Rome has become so politically chaotic that constant competition is becoming inefficient. Elections are turning ugly. Senate factions are becoming more aggressive. Political deadlocks are everywhere. So Caesar proposes something unusual. Not an official government office, not a legal institution, a private agreement. 3 men working together behind the scenes to coordinate Roman politics. This becomes the First Triumvirate. And almost immediately, it changes everything. Because together, these 3 men control almost every major form of influence in Rome. Caesar controls public popularity and political strategy. Pompey controls military prestige and veteran loyalty. Crassus controls enormous financial networks. Separately, they are dangerous, but together they're almost unstoppable. And for a while, the alliance works incredibly well. Caesar gets political backing, Pompey gets land settlements for his soldiers, Crassus gains economic advantages and influence. But the one thing about alliances built entirely on mutual benefit is that they remain stable only as long as everyone continues benefiting equally, and eventually, that balance disappears. Caesar is eventually assigned to govern Gaul, and this is where the story really changes, because most people in Rome expect this to be a normal provincial assignment: maintain order, manage local conflicts, protect Roman territory. But Caesar sees something completely different: opportunity. Gaul is fragmented politically. Different tribes, different rivalries, different alliances, constantly shifting. And Caesar realizes he can use that instability. What follows becomes one of the most important military campaigns in Roman history. And honestly, part of what makes Caesar terrifying as a commander is how quickly he adapts. He does not just fight battles, he shapes conditions before battles even happen. He moves faster than enemies expect. He isolates tribes before they unite. He manipulates alliances constantly. And he understands psychology incredibly well. Sometimes entire groups surrender before major fighting even begins because Caesar creates the impression that resistance is hopeless. One of the first major campaigns involves the Helvetii migration, a massive tribal movement attempting to relocate across Roman-controlled territory. Most Roman commanders would simply treat this as a border issue. Caesar treats it like a strategic opportunity. He blocks movement routes, cuts off supplies, forces the Helvetii into weaker positions gradually. And instead of one giant cinematic victory, their resistance slowly collapses under pressure. But the real challenge comes later. Vercingetorix, a Gallic leader intelligent enough to recognize how dangerous Rome truly is. And unlike earlier tribal resistance, Vercingetorix actually manages to unite multiple groups together, which is rare. Instead of fighting Rome directly, he changes tactics completely. He burns supplies, destroys resources, avoids open battle, and forces Caesar deeper into logistical strain. And for a while, it works. Roman supply lines stretch dangerously. Food becomes harder to secure. Momentum slows. Then comes Alesia. And honestly, Alesia sounds almost fictional when you describe it. Caesar traps Vercingetorix inside the fortified city, but Caesar knows reinforcements are coming. So he builds 2 massive defensive walls, one facing inward to trap the city, one facing outward to defend against rescue forces. Meaning Caesar's army is essentially trapped between 2 enemy forces at the same time. And eventually, exactly what he fears happens. Huge Gallic reinforcements arrive. Now Roman soldiers are fighting in both directions simultaneously. Attacks from outside, attacks from inside, night assaults, supply pressure, constant chaos. And somehow, Caesar still holds. Eventually, Vercingetorix surrenders. And after this victory, Caesar becomes something Rome has not fully seen before. A political figure with a massive professional army personally loyal to him. Not to the Senate, to him. And that changes everything. While Caesar is becoming more powerful in Gaul, the Triumvirate starts cracking apart. Pompey grows closer to the Senate, Caesar becomes increasingly independent, and Crassus becomes obsessed with military glory. So Crassus launches a campaign against Parthia. And this turns into one of the greatest disasters Rome has experienced in generations, because Crassus makes a huge mistake. He assumes Rome's normal methods will work everywhere. At Carrhae, Roman forces enter open terrain expecting conventional battle tactics. Instead, the Parthians fight completely differently. Mounted archers attack constantly from range. Fast cavalry stays mobile. There are no stable front lines. Roman soldiers cannot effectively engage. There is nothing to charge directly, nothing to pin down, nothing to break decisively. Just endless arrows, hour after hour. Roman formations slowly collapse psychologically before they collapse physically. Exhaustion builds, confusion spreads, morale disappears. And eventually Crassus attempts negotiations. But it becomes a trap. He is killed. And according to legend, molten gold is poured into his mouth afterward as a symbolic message about greed. Whether that part is fully true or not almost does not matter anymore, because the story survives for a reason. It perfectly represents how Rome viewed Crassus in death. And with Crassus gone, the Triumvirate effectively dies with him. Now only Caesar and Pompey remain, and Rome realizes something terrifying. There is no longer enough space inside the Republic for both men to coexist peacefully. The Senate sides with Pompey, not necessarily because they trust him completely, but because Caesar has become more frightening. Caesar's army is experienced, victorious, loyal. So the Senate orders Caesar to disband his forces and return to Rome. And Caesar reaches the Rubicon River. Crossing it with an army is illegal. It means civil war. Behind Caesar is safety. Ahead of him is irreversible conflict. And then he crosses anyway, which is one of the most important moments in Roman history. Because once Caesar crosses the Rubicon, the Roman Republic effectively enters its final stage. Caesar advances through Italy incredibly quickly. Cities surrender without resistance. Political support collapses around Pompey faster than expected. Pompey retreats rather than risk immediate defeat. Eventually, the two sides meet at Pharsalus. Pompey technically has more soldiers, but Caesar has something more important: veterans, men who have spent years surviving brutal campaigns together, and the battle becomes chaotic. Dust everywhere, lines collapsing and reforming constantly, cavalry smashing into infantry formations. Then Caesar notices weakness on Pompey's flank, and like he has done his entire career, he moves aggressively before the opportunity disappears. Pompey's lines break. Then the army breaks. Then the entire political balance of Rome breaks with it. Pompey flees to Egypt hoping to regroup. Instead, he is murdered before Caesar even arrives. Which is honestly one of the saddest endings in Roman political history, because Pompey once looked untouchable, and now he dies alone, politically abandoned, and completely powerless. After Pompey's death, meaningful opposition to Caesar almost disappears. Caesar becomes dictator. The Senate still exists technically, but only technically, because the Republic was designed specifically to prevent one man from accumulating too much authority. And now one man controls almost everything. And the strange part is that Caesar does not destroy the Republic overnight. The Republic dies gradually, alliance by alliance, crisis by crisis, compromise by compromise, until eventually the system becomes so unstable that concentrated power starts feeling normal, then necessary, and then unavoidable. And that's probably the most important part of the entire story. Caesar did not destroy the Republic alone. Pompey did not destroy it alone. Crassus did not destroy it alone. All three of them did. Because they believed they could control a system that was already becoming impossible to control. And in trying to dominate Rome, they slowly broke the thing holding it together. And what replaced it was not balance, not reform, not recovery, but empire.